He is finally here. We are roughly 1 week away from Mauricio Pochettino calling up his very first US men's national team roster. There are plenty of players that are in good form for their clubs. There are also players that are in poor form for their clubs. We have a few that are injured that will be back very soon, and others that will not be available for this very first camp in October. With that said, which players will make it to Mauricio Pochettino's very first roster? Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to our US Men's National Team October roster prediction video. The very first that Pochettino will be officially in charge of the national team. But before we start, here are a few assumptions we must make in order to predict this roster. First, I'm going to assume that Pochettino is not an imbecile. And I know, that's a bit of a weird assumption, but you would be surprised in previous roster predictions of how many times I had to actually assume the opposite. I had to assume the coach was an imbecile.
Because he was.
I will also be assuming that this will be a 23-man roster. Even though the World Cup is expected to be a 26-man roster, this is a friendly window with just 2 games, so I fully expect him to just bring 23 players. I will also be assuming that he has nothing against MLS, but he will prioritize players playing at a higher level. By playing, I mean actually playing, not riding the bench 24/7, with some rare exceptions. Then some players, I'm going to have to assume that they will not be recovered from injury on time. And for that, I'm going to have to go on a case-by-case basis. Some players will have a few updates and they might be available for camp. Other players have injuries and have no set return date. Then I'll have to assume that they're going to be left out of the roster. Also, keep in mind that we have never seen a US Men's National Team Pochettino roster, so I'm going to do my best to select the players based on who is the better player, right? That's quite important. But then also who fits his playing style that we have talked about extensively in previous videos. We even made a video talking about his tactics. I do think he's going to call up the best players and adapt as much as he can. But again, we don't know. Last but not least, I'm going to assume that you have already hit the like button. Because if you didn't hit the like button yet, you are a loser. And I don't make the rules here, so don't be a loser. Okay, why don't we start with the goalkeepers? And for this camp, unlike the September camp, where we brought 4 goalkeepers, one of them being Diego Cochin, it was more for recruiting purposes, I think Pochettino will only bring 3 goalkeepers. And keep in mind, Diego Cochin is currently injured, and he's expected to be out for another 3 to 4 weeks, so don't expect him to be in this camp. But boy, let me tell you, this is a rough one. Our goalkeeping situation is pretty bad. It's quite abysmal. And I think he's going to bring these 3 goalkeepers. And they are Patrick Schulte from the Columbus Crew, Matt Turner due to lack of options from Crystal Palace, and Gabriel Slonina from Barnsley simply because we don't have many options, so you might as well bring the promising goalkeeper. I think there's no way he brings Ethan Horvath. I mean, this guy just got benched at Cardiff City in the 2nd Division of England in his prime years. So honestly, I can't blame him. The 3 options he has right now are probably Patrick Schulte, Matt Turner, and Gabriel Slonina. It's not looking good. We got to hope these players, especially Slonina and Schulte, develop till 2026. But goalkeeper right now is definitely the worst position for the US men's national team. And keep in mind that Pochettino likes to play at the back, which requires a goalkeeper that is at least a little bit technical on the ball or comfortable with his feet. None of the 3 that I mentioned are very comfortable with their feet. Matt Turner being the worst one when it comes to distribution, first touch, and all that. But none of them are very comfortable on the ball, just to make that clear. But you can let me know if there are other goalkeeping options that you would consider. Next on the list, we have the center backs. And I believe he's going to bring 4 of them. And they are Chris Richards from Crystal Palace, Cameron Carter-Vickers from Celtic in Scotland, Mark McKenzie from Toulouse in France, and Tim Ream from Charlotte FC in MLS. Yes, I still think he's going to bring Tim Ream. 1, due to lack of options. 2, he is a veteran. And 3, he's a ball-playing defender, which I think Mauricio Pochettino very much appreciates. Don't get mad at me. don't shoot the messenger. I would honestly rather give Jalen Neal from the LA Galaxy a look, or even Kobe Henry that's making the bench for Reims in France a look. Lord, I would even want to give Tanner Tessman a look as a center back. I don't think he's going to bring Walker Zimmerman or Miles Robinson. Both are not ball-playing defenders, so I find it unlikely. Not that the other options I mentioned are perfect on the ball, but they're definitely much more competent on that aspect. But again, I could be wrong. We'll see what Pochettino does. Richards is our best center back right now. Cameron Carter-Vickers is someone that Pochettino has worked with in Tottenham in the past and even complimented him as a young center back. At the time, obviously. Now Carter-Vickers is much older. Mark McKenzie has looked competent in France. He is dealing with a minor injury, but he's expected to be back next weekend. And then Tim Ream is just someone I think he will continue to bring on, at least early on. And understand, Jalen Neal, that is an option that I'd like to see in the national team soon. He ain't perfect, but he's great on the ball, very comfortable on the ball, and has shown some good moments on defense, even though he does struggle in isolation at times, and the positioning can improve, but he is just 21. Tanner Tessman, I have talked about it extensively. I think he has the player profile of a center back, but no one has ever played him there, so I doubt Pochettino would bring Tanner Tessman as a center back. Maybe as a midfielder. We're going to talk about that very soon. The conclusion here in this section is that we really need to recruit the Japanese-American Henri Chase that plays for Stuttgart. Now, just to recap who I think he will bring for this camp: Chris Richards from Crystal Palace, Tim Ream from Charlotte FC, Carter-Vickers from Celtic, and then last but not least, Mark McKenzie from Toulouse. Next up, we have the fullbacks. So simply based on the options we have, or shall I say, the lack of options that we have, I believe Pochettino will only bring 3 fullbacks and have midfielders or wingers play as fullbacks or wingbacks if needed. As we know, Yunus Musah, Weston McKennie, Tim Weah can all play as a fullback or wingback at a high level if needed. Probably better than any other option that he would have to call up. So the 2 locks for me are Anthony Robinson, the left back from Fulham, and Joe Scally, the right back for Borussia Mönchengladbach that can also play as a left back. Serginho Dest is a lock, but he's still not available as he is recovering from a torn ACL. Now, due to having many other options to play right back in this roster in the midfield, like I said, I mentioned Tim Weah, I mentioned Weston McKennie or Yunus Musah, I think he's going to bring one more left back because the other options for the right back would be someone like Marlon Fossey, Brian Reynolds. I don't think either one will make the cut. So I believe he's going to bring John Tolkin from the New York Red Bulls. He's accustomed to a pressing system, something Pochettino appreciates. And honestly, we don't have many good options when we look back at the left back position. He's probably the most competent of the bunch. Caleb Wiley from Strasbourg is another option. He is younger and more promising than John Tolkin, but he's currently dealing with a knee tendonitis, so his status for this camp is unclear and questionable. I know many like Christopher Lund, but he didn't really convince me, and I don't think he convinced Mauricio Pochettino as well. He's also 22 and playing the second division of Italy for Palermo. I don't think Pochettino will call him up. So again, to recap, I believe he's going to bring A-Rob from Fulham, Joe Scally from Borussia not Dortmund, and John Tolkin from the New York Red Bulls. And again, John Tolkin is a player that needs to move to Europe as soon as possible. Can he make it in Europe? I don't know. You have to go, see, and try. But he is a very good left back in MLS. He looked competent in the Olympics, so give it a shot. After the fullbacks, we have the midfielders. And by now, in this video, you probably should have already hit the like button if you haven't already. And for the midfield, I believe he's going to bring 7 players. And you know what? Midfield is a tricky one. It's where we have the most options, the most depth. Right away, let's go through the players that are likely locks for the October camp. Weston McKennie, Yunus Musah, Malik Tillman, and Johnny Cardoso. McKennie has become a starter for Juventus once again. Yunus Musah has been benched for Milan. He has been a backup for them for quite some time, but he's still among one of our best midfielders. Malik Tillman has been fantastic for PSV this season and will probably be Mauricio Pochettino's go-to 10 this camp. And Johnny Cardoso has been dealing with a muscle discomfort, but he should be a lock for this camp as well, especially due to the fact that Tyler Adams and Gio Reyna, that would be locks, they're not available. They probably won't be in this camp. They're currently injured, and we are roughly 1 week away from the roster release. I think it's safe to assume that Tyler and Gio will not be available, which opens up space for Johnny Cardoso and Malik Tillman. So again, the first 4 that are locks: McKennie, Musah, Tillman, and Johnny, which means we have 3 more spots to go. And the options are Leonard Maloney from Heidenheim, I think he makes the roster. Luca De La Torre, I think he won't make the roster. He hasn't played a single minute this season for Celta Vigo, and apparently he's dealing with an ankle injury. So I think Luca De La Torre will be left out. Now, Gianluca Busio is off to a good start in the Serie A for Venezia, and he actually looked quite good for the US in the Olympics until he got injured. So I think Busio will also make the roster in the midfield. He can play the 8, he can play the 10. I probably would not put him as a 6. So then we have one spot left, and it could be a young promising player or a washed veteran. Young promising players would be someone like Diego Luna, maybe Paxton Aronson, or Tanner Tessman, which is also still a fairly young player, that despite not getting many minutes at Lyon so far, he has shown some promise. And again, I have listed Tessman as a midfielder because that's where all the coaches play him. But I do think he has the player profile and the skill set to be a very good center back, and I'm going to continue to push that agenda. But for this roster, I think Tanner Tessman will make it as a midfielder, unfortunately. So let's recap. I think he's going to bring Weston McKennie from Juventus, Yunus Musa from Milan, Johnny Cardoso from Real Betis, Malik Tillman from PSV, Leonard Maloney from Heidenheim, Gianluca Busio from Venezia, and Tanner Tessman from Lyon. Now, I fully expect Gio Reyna and Tyler Adams to take 2 of those spots in the future if healthy, but for this roster, those will likely be the 7. And my question to you is this. If Gio Reyna and Tyler Adams were healthy, they would probably be among those 7 players. Which of those 7 would get cut? You got to cut 2 of them. Let me know. Next up, we have the wingers, and I believe he's going to bring 4 wingers for this camp. And this one is actually pretty easy to pick the players. It's not like we have that many options, but let's talk about it. So the players are Christian Pulisic from Milan, our best player, Tim Weah from Juventus that can also play right back and can also play striker if needed, Brendan Aronson from Leeds because again, he presses a lot, Pochettino's gonna love that, and then Haji Wright from Coventry that can play as a winger and can play as a forward. I do understand that there could be maybe talks or maybe Coleosho could come into camp, you know, the winger from Burnley. But that means you believe that in the past 3 weeks, Pochettino was able to convince Coleosho to join the US and leave Italy. So I don't think he had enough time to do that. I don't even know if he actually did that. Kevin Paredes would be another option, but he's been injured all month and still hasn't recovered. He's still not back from the injury, so I don't expect him to make the roster. Taylor Booth and Paxton Aronson, they have been benched for Utrecht, so I don't really expect any of them to make it. Another option that actually looked good during the Olympics but is off to a rough start this season and plays in a much weaker league is Griffin Yao. He still plays in Belgium, so I don't expect him to make the roster as well. And again, I know I went with the safe picks here, but I truly believe that Pulisic, Aronson, Weah, and Haji Wright will be the wingers that he's going to bring for this camp. Okay, so after we recorded this video, it was reported that Tim Weah injured his ankle, which means he is questionable to be in the US men's national team camp. With that said, if Weah can't go, maybe Pochettino just brings a prospect like Diego Luna, Paxton Aronson, maybe gives Griffin Yao a shot. You know, he's a winger and he plays in Belgium. Or he can just move Malik Tillman to the winger position or just bring 3 wingers and bring an extra midfielder like maybe in Aiden Morris from Middlesbrough, something like that. I don't know what he would do, but I just wanted to update you on that. Tim Weah, at the time of this recording, is actually questionable to be fully fit for the US men's national team camp. All right, bye. Last but not least, we have the center forwards. And as I said earlier in the video, I'm assuming this is a 23-man roster. And if it's a 23-man roster, you only have 2 spots left. So you're going to have 2 center forwards. And this one was actually quite easy for me because the way I see our center forward position is Balogun is our best center forward. Josh Sargent is number 2, and Ricardo Pepi is 3. Maybe Ricardo Pepi has a higher ceiling than a Josh Sargent, for example, but Pepi is barely playing for PSV. He's also not scoring when he's playing, and when he plays for the national team, he's actually been quite wasteful the past few games for the US, even though in the past he's been super clutch. So to me, this one's pretty easy. Balogun has to be there. He's a lock for the roster. And then Sargent, he is our second best center forward, and he kind of fits a lot of the player profile of what Pochettino looks for in a center forward. Hold-up game, the press, all of that, he really fits the player profile. We talked about that in a separate video already. I'm not going to dive into it here. So I believe it's going to be Balogun and Josh Sargent. And then after those 3, Balogun, Sargent, and Pepi, the options kind of drop off a bit. We have players like Pifok from Union Berlin, Brendan Vasquez from Monterrey, Jesus Ferreira from FC Dallas, even though he's not really even a center forward. And don't even say Duncan Maguire. He should not be in the national team. So again, Balogun and Sargent. Pepi will likely be left out. All right, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like right now before you go. And understand, this is a very tricky roster to predict because we don't have data on Pochettino in charge of the US men's national team. And I have been very accurate with my roster predictions under Berhalter because we had a lot of data on him. Pochettino, we don't, so I could get a lot of it wrong. But out of those 23, I'm pretty confident that I'll get at least 19 of them right because a lot of these players just pick themselves, right? They're the best players and he's going to have to bring them anyway. But that's all for today, everyone. Thank you, everyone that's been joining our Patreon. We appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts, and it's a great way to support the channel. With that said, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.